Inside Beijing, Donald Trump has a nickname, and it's not flattering to Washington. They call him Chanjing Wa, China's nation builder. A joke, yes, but also a verdict. Because as Trump slaps tariffs, threatens allies, bombs disagreements into submission, and turns diplomacy into a game of public humiliation, America's closest partners are quietly doing the unthinkable, hedging away from the United States and drifting toward China. France was rolled out the red carpet in Beijing. Canada cuts tariffs on Chinese EVs after years of frost. European leaders line up flights eastward. Trump says it's strength. Allies feel instability. And China sees opportunity. When America first starts to look like America alone, when unpredictability replaces trust and protectionism punishes friends as harshly as rivals, the global order starts to tilt. So here's the uncomfortable question Washington can't dodge anymore. Is Donald Trump, in trying to contain China, actually helping China rise faster? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. Trump insists his trade wars, tariffs, and threats are designed to counter China and Russia, but reality is biting back. Since returning to office, he has overturned decades of US support for freer trade, imposed sweeping import taxes, targeted allies alongside rivals, and made America feel volatile to those who once trusted it most. Canada now calls China more predictable than the US. Europe no longer assumes Washington's reliability. China, meanwhile, offers calm language, multilateralism, and open markets, at least rhetorically. If allies fear being strong-armed by Washington more than squeezed by Beijing, who exactly benefits from Trump's chaos? Let's start with the nickname, Chanjing Wa, China's nation builder. It didn't come from propaganda departments. It emerged organically online from analysts, commentators, and policy circles watching Trump dismantle US credibility piece by piece. Every tariff threat, every alliance insult, every unilateral shock is seen not as pressure on Beijing, but as a gift. Because China doesn't need to fight harder. It just needs to wait while America pushes its own partners away. Trump's worldview is simple. Pressure works. Tariffs punish. Threats coerce. Loyalty is extracted, not earned. But global politics doesn't function like a hostile takeover. When Trump imposes double-digit tariffs on nearly every country, targets steel, auto, and agriculture sector, and threatens retaliation over unrelated political disputes, allies don't submit. They diversify. And diversification today means China. Canada is the clearest warning sign. A country once welded economically to the United States just made its first prime ministerial visit to Beijing in nearly a decade. Mark Carney didn't go quietly. He went to reset relations, reopen trade, and send a signal. Within days, thousands of Chinese electric vehicles were cleared for entry. Tariffs were slashed. Canola exports were revived. And the language shifted dramatically. China, Carney said, had become more predictable than the United States.
Is this land on which we're going to build the greatest golden dome ever built? We're building a golden dome that's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. What we did for Israel was amazing, but that's nothing compared to what we have planned for the United States, Canada, and the rest of the world. We are going to build a dome like no other.
Mine is the first visit of a Canadian Prime Minister to China in nearly a decade. The world has changed much since that last visit. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
That sentence alone should have set off alarms in Washington. Predictable, China. United States, unpredictable. For a country that sends 75% of its exports south of the border, this wasn't posturing. It was risk management. Because when Trump threatens tariffs over advertisements, hints at annexation rhetoric, and keeps trade agreements hostage to personal whims, even the closest ally starts looking for exits. The Canada-China thaw didn't come out of nowhere. Relations had been toxic since 2018, when Canada arrested a Huawei executive at America's request and China retaliated by detaining 2 Canadians. The scars were deep. Security concerns were real, and yet, one Trump-era recalibration later, Beijing suddenly looks like the more stable partner. That's not China winning hearts. That's America losing trust. And Canada isn't alone. France saw the writing on the wall earlier. Emmanuel Macron's lavish reception in China wasn't just about anniversaries and handshakes. It was about hedging. About keeping doors open while Washington rattles NATO, threatens tariffs, and undermines the very rules-based order it once enforced. When Macron talks about global disruption, he's not pointing at Beijing alone. He's pointing at Washington too.
It's as well a shift towards a world without rules, where international law is trampled underfoot, and where the only law that seems to matter is that of the strongest, and imperial ambitions are resurfacing. Obviously, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which will enter into its 4th year next month, and conflicts continue in the Middle East and across Africa. This is as well a shift towards a world without effective collective governance, and where multilateralism is weakened by powers that obstruct it or turn away from it, and rules are undermined. And I can multiply the examples of international bodies weakened or left by the key economies. And when we look at the situation, it's clearly a very concerning time, because we are killing the structure where we can fix the situation and the common challenges we have. Without collective governance, cooperation gives way to relentless competition. Competition from the United States of America through trade agreements that undermine our export interests, demand maximum concessions, and openly aim to weaken and subordinate Europe, combined with an endless accumulation of new tariffs that are fundamentally unacceptable, even more so when they are used as leverage against territorial sovereignty.
European leaders aren't suddenly naive about China's ambitions. They know Beijing weaponizes trade. They know dependency carries risks. But they also know something else. The US alliance system no longer feels stable under Trump. And in geopolitics, uncertainty is poison. Think tanks are already tracking the fallout. Brookings notes favorability toward the United States is collapsing among allies, even as perceptions of China's economic influence rise. European studies show more countries now view Beijing as a necessary partner or even an ally. Expectations of Trump are lower almost everywhere, not because of China's charm offensive, but because of America's self-inflicted wounds. Trump's defenders argue tariffs protect American industry, but critics warn they're reviving Great Depression-era risks, fueling inflation, distorting supply chains, and undermining competitiveness. And while Washington closes markets, Beijing opens alternatives. China reroutes exports from the US to Europe and Southeast Asia. The result? A record $1.2 trillion global trade surplus in 2025, despite years of US tariffs. That number matters because it exposes the illusion at the heart of Trump's strategy. Tariffs didn't weaken China. They pushed China to diversify. They forced innovation. They expanded Beijing's global trade footprint. Meanwhile, allies hit by US levies didn't rebuild loyalty. they rebuilt supply chains without America at the center. Nowhere is this clearer than electric vehicles. Trump administration has been openly hostile to EV production, favoring fossil fuels and stalling green transitions. China, meanwhile, dominates EV batteries, electronics, and affordability. Canada looked at that contrast and made a choice. Learn from China, access supply chains, build competitiveness, because waiting for Washington's approval no longer feels viable. Even inside Canada, the deal sparked backlash. Auto workers fear competition. Provinces warn of exposure. Critics accuse Carney of gambling. And yet, the logic remains brutal. When the US threatens to tear up trade agreements, allies need options. China offers one, imperfect, risky, but available. Trump's unpredictability amplifies the shift. He targets Brazil over prosecutions. He threatens tariffs over Greenland. He links trade access to political obedience. One day he praises deals, the next he threatens retaliation. That volatility forces governments to plan for worst-case scenarios, and worst-case planning no longer assumes US stability. At Davos, the contrast couldn't have been sharper. Trump arrived sowing discord, leaking messages, floating territorial threats. China's vice premier arrived preaching multilateralism, free trade, consensus, and cooperation. Beijing didn't need to convince the room. Trump already had.
To embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. They are the heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers, and I have them, and you have them, and we all have them. And they want to see us do badly, but we don't let that happen. They predicted an overpopulation crisis in the 1960s, mass starvation in the 70s, and an end of oil in the 1990s. These alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives. We will never let radical socialists destroy our economy, wreck our country, or eradicate our liberty. America will always be the proud, strong, and unyielding bastion of freedom.
Before the rules, everyone should be equal. A very small number of countries should not enjoy privileges based on their own selfish interests. The world must not return to the jungle law, where the strong prey on the weak. All countries have the right to safeguard their legitimate interests. China has consistently emphasized development that benefits all. It seeks to drive shared prosperity with its trading partners and is committed to expanding the global economic and trade bee. China has never deliberately pursued a trade surplus. It is willing not only to be the world's factory, but also to be the world's market.
Mark Carney's Davos speech landed like a thunderclap. The rules-based order, he said, was fading and not coming back. Strong words from one of America's closest partners. Stronger still was the implication. The US no longer anchors the system it once dominated. And when he talked about American hegemony, Beijing quietly took notes.
It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Well, it won't. So what are our options? In 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with the greengrocer. Every morning, this shopkeeper places a sign in his window: "Workers of the world unite." He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false. Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true.
China's strategy is deceptively simple. Stay calm, stay open, let Washington alienate allies. Xi Jinping doesn't need dramatic breakthroughs. He needs time. Every Trump tariff, every alliance rupture, every credibility hit pushes the world closer to Beijing's multipolar vision. That doesn't mean countries trust China blindly. Leaders know Beijing can weaponize trade. They know dependency can turn punitive overnight. But trust is relative. And right now, many governments fear falling victim to a predatory United States more than to an assertive China. That's a staggering reversal. Even Trump's stated goals undercut his results. He claims tariffs raise revenue, protect industry, and bring investment home. Sometimes they do. Taiwan invested $250 billion after tariff pressure eased. But that only reinforces the perception that access to the US market now depends on political bargaining, not shared values or rules. For allies, that's exhausting. Negotiations become hostage situations, trade becomes leverage, sovereignty feels conditional, and when loyalty is punished as easily as dissent, alliances fray. That's when China steps in, not as a savior, but as an alternative. Beijing understands optics. It frames itself as calm, dependable, and patient. It says it doesn't seek trade surpluses, even as it posts record ones. It calls itself a partner, not a rival. And when applause breaks out at global forums, Chinese state media amplifies every clap. Trump, meanwhile, frames diplomacy as domination. Friends are treated like subordinates. Disagreement invites punishment. Multilateralism is mocked. Over time, that posture erodes America's greatest advantage, not its economy or military, but its network of willing partners. The irony is brutal. Trump set out to weaken China. Instead, he fractured the coalition needed to balance it. He turned tariffs into blunt instruments that hit allies hardest. He made Washington unpredictable and Beijing patient. And in global politics, patience wins. What makes this moment dangerous for Washington is not one trade deal or one Beijing visit. It's the pattern. A slow, grinding recalibration happening quietly, capital by capital. Not loud defections, not dramatic ruptures. Just a steady loosening of America's grip as allies plan for a future where the US is no longer the reliable center of gravity. Trump's defenders still argue this is leverage, that fear keeps allies in line. But fear doesn't build systems, it corrodes them. When tariffs can appear overnight, when treaties are treated as disposable, when alliances feel transactional rather than strategic, governments don't double down, they diversify. And diversification today points east. China understands the psychology perfectly. Beijing doesn't demand loyalty speeches. It offers access, markets, supply chains, predictability. Even when the terms are tough, at least they are consistent. In a Trump-shaped world of sudden tariffs and public threats, consistency itself becomes power. That's why China doesn't need to counter Trump loudly. It doesn't need propaganda wars or grand gestures. Every time Washington lashes out at an ally, Beijing gains by default. Every time America breaks with its own past, China looks like continuity. Look again at Canada's gamble. It wasn't an embrace of China's ideology. It was an insurance policy against American volatility. Against a president who jokes about annexation, threatens retaliation, and keeps the USMCA hanging by a thread. When your largest trading partner feels like a threat, even bad options start looking necessary. So is Trump indirectly helping China? Beijing's own nickname answers that question. Every recalibration by Canada, every visit by France, every European hedge, every study showing declining US favorability, none of it was orchestrated by China alone. Much of it was enabled by America's own choices. Trump didn't set out to strengthen China, but intent doesn't matter in geopolitics. Outcomes do. And the outcome is becoming impossible to ignore. As America alienates, China absorbs. As Washington fractures trust, Beijing collects options. The question now isn't whether Trump helped China. It's whether the US can reverse the damage before the nickname stops being a joke and starts reading like a historical footnote. China didn't need to conquer markets or coerce allies. It just needed Trump to keep pushing, threatening, tariffing, and alienating. The world watched. The world adjusted, and the balance quietly shifted. If Chanjing Wa truly means nation builder, the bitter truth for Washington is this: the nation being built may not be America's. Thank you for watching Statecraft.